Hi, I'm Katherine Cooper from Presto Classical. I'm over at EMI today to have a quick chat with Ian Bostridge about one of his three major record projects for the Britten centenary. Ian, hi. Lovely to meet you. I thought we might speak first about the Michelangelo sonnets. They're the works that I know least well represented on disc, I think. Was it a conscious decision to choose to work with an Italian pianist?
No, it was really, the project came out of a long friendship with Tony Papano, doing a lot of different things together, though we have done a lot of Britten together, and we met, I think, about 12 years ago doing the War Requiem, the Britten War Requiem in Los Angeles. But it was a sort of added gift when we made a decision to do Britten songs, which he plays wonderfully, that he could also give me the added expertise both in the Italian language, in Italian style, and in also sort of understanding what Britain's doing in this music, because it's incredibly full of idiomatic Italian touches and little nods to other composers, but at the same time is very much itself.
Yeah, so for me it's like nothing that I've heard by Britten before, and I was struggling to pin down, does this sound like Donizetti? Does it sound like a Verdi composition?
Occasionally Tony would say, oh, this is so like Tosti, who's this 19th century song composer, Paolo Tosti, who actually I think ended up living in England and writing a lot of popular song repertoire for the English market. Bits of Puccini. I mean, I think there was a moment where Tony said, oh my god, that's Tosca.
Right. Yeah.
But it's so absorbed into the style that I don't think you'd ever hear an Italian song that really sounded like that. It's not pastiche in any way.
No, and as you say, it's very much of itself and distinguishable as Britten, but at the same time unlike anything else in this vocal output. You've not sung a huge amount of Italian repertoire, as far as I'm aware. Did you play around with anything in order to get into the idiom?
I've sung quite a lot of Baroque Italian repertoire, which was incredibly liberating. I mean, I always used to, being very much in sort of English, German lieder singing school, and that being my sort of route to becoming a singer, I always used to feel very uncomfortable in Italian. And then I did Monteverdi's Orfeo, which is a very texty, but at the same time operatic piece. The first, pretty much the first opera ever written, not the very first, but the first that's in the repertoire. And that gave me a feel for how wonderful Italian could be as a language where you use the voice to colour the words, because I'd always thought, oh my god, Italian, it's all about the voice, but actually you can really use the language. And ever since then I found Italian I felt much more comfortable in it, and I've done quite a lot of Italian repertoire now. I've done quite a lot of 18th century Baroque repertoire, and I, as a sort of dare to myself, I did this cycle a lot in Italy. A few years ago I did a tour in Italy of the Michelangelo sonnets, slightly altering some of the, occasionally he missets very occasionally, 2 or 3 examples where he misstresses the language and you have to make a correction, but otherwise. The interesting thing though is that the language is very difficult even for Italian speakers.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Is it dialect or?
It's just very, very archaic, very literary, complicated Renaissance Italian.
Right, okay. I wanted to ask you a little, if I may, about the texts of the poems. We're obviously not dealing with a traditional Renaissance sonnet sequence here. Frankly, how did Britten get away with setting this text that's so unabashedly homoerotic?
I imagine they didn't have the translations that are in the front of the score are a complete sort of travesty. They're by Peter Pears and Elizabeth Mayer, who was a great friend, a German friend of the two of them, who they stayed with in America for some time, famous translator of Goethe. And they are sort of, they're terribly watered down and very inaccurate. I don't know when they first performed this piece at the Wigmore Hall whether they even had a translation, because it was pretty extraordinary to have these two men who were pretty unpopular, as it were, because they were coming back from America. They were pacifists in the middle of the Second World War. To have two men in a relationship with each other standing up, Britain sitting down, Peter Pears standing up at the Wigmore Hall and singing about, naked and alone, I am the prisoner of this night, or just very, as you say, very homoerotic text.
Indeed, and they were written for public performance. When I first listened to these songs, my first thought was that they'd perhaps been written as a private gift to Pears and uncovered later on. They were from what, 1940s?
He was I think 1942 probably, but he was back in 1942 or 43. But yeah, it's extraordinary, and I mean, but they're full of complexity, I think, because I don't think his relationship with Piers was very fresh and new, and it was still full of, I don't know, I think he was still in a state of some emotional turmoil and confusion. They're not straightforward love declarations. There's darkness going on.
Finally, I'm sure you're asked this question with alarming frequency. How do you go about engaging with the legacy of Piers? How much do you listen to him when you're actually in the process of recording?
Not much anymore.
Right.
When I started out as a singer, I listened to him an awful lot, and I don't so much anymore. And if I did, I think I would be less. You develop as an experienced singer your own way of doing things, and you may get ideas from other people, but in the end it's going to be different because your voice is different.
Yes, do you find that there are, particularly I wondered about the Michelangelo sonnets again with this, whether there are things in the writing that are so much written for one particular voice that are difficult?
I don't think Britten knew Piers' voice as well as he came to know it in the...
oh, of course.
I do one of the songs, the third song, in a slightly lower key than it's written in, which is a key that Piers actually sang it in the 1950s. There's a famous video of a Japanese tour, and I think it suits my voice, and I think it suits Piers' voice better in that key than in the higher key, because it's a sort of B flat tenor sort of key rather than a more heroic B-ish sort of tenor key.
Yes, there's a huge difference, isn't there, just in a semitone?
Yeah, the semis are different. Yeah. So I think it's interesting that the Italian, the Michelangelo sonnets just demand a totally different sort of singing, really. They're very Italianate, and it's good for one, actually, and it was probably good for Piers, but it's interesting that I think he didn't quite have the measure of Piers' capacities at that stage and what was best for him.